will a church be able to stay awake with the Master? This is the last part and conclusion of this video essay, Triumph and Shame of Christianity in Power. Thank you for joining me on this trip. If you've enjoyed these videos and learned something from them, consider subscribing to my YouTube channel, sharing the content with your friends, or even buying my books or albums, or you can even contribute financially to my Patreon channel. All these things help me to continue to produce high-level resources for you. The historical, biblical, and theological journey that brought us to this point is not definitive. It does not cover all fronts or possibilities, and may indeed incur many sins along the way. However, this journey has allowed us to recognize at least two things. In the first place, some horizons of possibility that the Christian faith could have in the public sphere, a faith intertwined and renewed by countercultural relationships born within the community in which Jesus is king. And secondly, the dangers of the alliances between religion with the powers of the day can entail. We live with the awareness that Constantinianism has been a recurring temptation in Christianity's history. History teaches us quite clearly concerning the dangers that the church at an institutional level and as a whole carries when it aligns itself behind a political, economic, or cultural project. This results very frequently in the loss of the specifically Christian identity. This problem comes from its inability to offer a prophetic voice and the full assimilation of an alternative gospel under a determined ideology. Recognizing all this should not lead us to fuga Mundi, or flight from the world. This could lead to the desire to escape out of history under a supposedly apolitical banner, or out of fear of getting involved in issues of this world. The truth is that living in society, living in the polis, or the city, is in itself a political act. Christians are called to make the exodus to the reign of Christ, but it is not the same as a self-imposed exile from all social, historical, or political involvement. The exodus of the ecclesia does not ignore the world, but understand the power of its renewing potential through the gospel. And here we enter into rugged terrain. What place will an individual and the community play in terms of missions and vocations in the public stage? What will believers' relationship in social organizations, political parties, the state, and the ethical discussions in post-Christian societies like our own look like? What concrete decisions and commitments will the Christian community make to serve others? How can we be salt and light in the world to promote justice and a commitment to those most in need, our environment, and human rights? All these are fundamental questions that lie beyond the dangers and possibilities outlined here. Yet these questions must be answered with integrity and care by each person who embraces the Christian faith. Reflecting on the relationship between the church and the temporal powers implies a call to fidelity to the gospel and the possibility of contributing from our hope towards the common good of society and creation. The kingdom of God lives in a permanent eschatological tension. It is, in the language of the theologians, already but not yet. The gospel asks of us to have one foot in our immediate reality and another foot in the promise of hope. The Swiss Protestant theologian Karl Barth referred to this when he said that sermons should be prepared with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. The Argentine Catholic bishop Enrique Angelelli went in a similar direction when he said that we must have one ear with the people and another with the gospel. Those who follow Jesus live a fragile balance between these paradoxical realities, now and not yet, or in the language of John 17, being in this world but not belonging of it. When we only remember one of these truths, we lose our balance. Anglican Bishop John Robinson said that a church that is indistinguishable from the world, which is not an alternative, and is so close to the world, it ends up not being able to speak to it, and therefore loses its prophetic role. Likewise, a church little involved in the world is so far from it that it cannot talk to it either. The church forgets that its mission, like that of Jesus himself, begins with the incarnation. We affirm that we are in the world, which is why our destiny participates in all humanity's future. We are not aliens. We share the joys and miseries of the people who inhabit this planet. We cannot take refuge in the promise of heaven and forget about the world around us. And we also must affirm that at the same time that we are not of this world, and therefore we must always ask ourselves where our loyalties lie. According to the scriptures, our lives are like those of pilgrims and strangers who are on their way to their true home. Although we can support or feel an individual identification with certain projects, candidates, and parties, it is a mistake to directly identify any of these as corresponding to the kingdom of God which Jesus spoke of. When Christianity is no longer an alternative community, the sociological consequences are similar to the events of the artistic avant-garde movements of the beginning of the 20th century, such as Dadaism, Cubism, or Expressionism. Shortly before he died, André Breton, the father of Surrealism, told filmmaker Luis Buñuel, "My dear friend, nobody is scandalized by anything anymore." The avant-garde movements, which were born as a radical alternative to modernity's bourgeois art, their modus operandi was scandal, discomfort, rupture, and even shock. But when this revolutionary and alternative spirit of the avant-garde was embraced by Western art status quo, having been canonized in museums and domesticated by the cultural industry, the scandal disappeared. The alternative became part of the cultural establishment and was absorbed as part of the status quo. This is the paradox of success. The avant-garde movements disputed traditional art and sought to make their alternative project visible. But when the possibility arose to be mainstream, these avant-garde movements disappeared. Analogously, Christianity was born as an alternative to its time and spread rapidly throughout the Roman Empire. However, when it became part of the ruling group and the hegemonic power, it became powerless. To paraphrase Luther, the victorious church is the church of the cross, not the church of glory. The desire to seek comfort and enjoy a good name is Christianity's staunchest enemy. We do not want to suffer or lose faith. We instinctively resist pain and being treated as inferior. For this reason, in the face of trial and criticism, we have repeatedly chosen the path of Peter. We have denied Christ. The church in Constantine's time was the first to fall into this seducing trap. But this isn't the only example. A paradigmatic case of this is that of modernity's rationalist theology. For centuries, many of the brightest theologians of Christianity, mainly Protestants in Europe, rallied behind the utopian visions of progress, reason, science, technology, democracy, and even capitalism. At the height of the Enlightenment, criticizing any of these things required enormous courage. No one wanted to fall under the judgment of the Enlightenment's gatekeepers or suffer the shame of rebelling against the gods of modernity. Stating any mistrust of reason sounded absurd and retrograde. This sentiment directed in large part Protestant theology during modernity. Many wrote for the defense of bourgeois ideology, maintaining that it was impossible to affirm certain truths of the Christian faith to questions so evident to the spirit of the age. Many theologians extolled and legitimized modernity, but as Johann Baptist Metz suggests, when modernity's ship sank, this version of theology sank with it in the shipwreck. Again, it is easy to criticize the past while simultaneously embracing the ideas of the spirit of our age as useful, avant-garde, or even prestigious. But at the core of our contemporary age, there is no social alternative. If we think of these ideals as alternative, though they are not, what does the Christian faith have to give? Betting on the gospel and its unusual alternative is difficult to do when contemporary society sees it as useless, retrograde, or passé. This is why I keep asking myself a simple question. What are the special, unique, or specific elements about the teachings of Jesus and the message of the kingdom of heaven? As we dialogue with our culture, history, or the conflicts of our time, what are those non-negotiable elements of the teachings of Jesus to which we cannot lose sight of without losing the master as well? Giving up the gospel's radical proposal to seek more prestigious solutions often means giving up the creative power of the Christian faith. This is what the church felt during Constantine's time. It was urgent to make a political alliance with the empire in order to avoid martyrdom and make the ecclesial structure more efficient. A similar compromise happened during the Middle Ages, when the Church chose to form a pseudo-Christian society, rife of violence and conquest, than to fall under the Turk's siege. Again, this is what happened during the Reformation. The pact with the princely nobles seemed the only way to ensure Protestantism's survival in chaotic times. This is what happened with modern theology's attitude towards rationalism. Christianity had to abandon its supernatural and transcendent content so that it would not sound like some magical or medieval religion. This also happened when the Catholic Church made alliances with Latin American governments. Losing these agreements would imply a very high economic, social, and symbolic cost for the Catholic Church in those countries. This is what happens in the United States amongst conservative Protestant groups, positing that if they were to stop lobbying Congress, this would mean losing visibility and influence in the nation's politics. This is the case for many evangelical churches in Latin America, who, in order to confront feminism and the so-called gender ideology or abortion, end up making alliances with far-right sectors and along the way demonize and turn their backs on a good part of their society. This is what happens with many progressive Christians who, following the footsteps of modern theology, adhere to the slogans and causes that are in the vogue. Their desire not to be left out of the conversation end up turning a blind eye to the central issues of the Christian faith. The fidelity of the Christian community to the life, work, message, death, and resurrection of Jesus as the Kyrios of God's Basileia is at the center of the alternative dimension of Christianity, of the theology of salvation, and the ideal of justice in Christianity. To hide this golden thread behind other interests is to deprive the Christian faith of its characteristic paradoxical alternative. Despite internal and external pressures that desire to disfigure the message of Jesus and the loyalty of the Christian communities to the kingdom of God, we must insist on the alternative of the gospel, the good news that goes to the heart of the needs of our era, and that at the same time offers something that no utopian vision can match. Against all odds that affirm the death of the gospel's message, insisting on the Christian alternative may still be the most effective strategy for radical transformation of society, more than any attempt to occupy the palace of the pharaoh or the emperor. The Christian strategy to transform society does not come from the top, but it comes from the bottom. Matthew 26 details a heartbreaking scene in the Gospels. Jesus goes to pray in Gethsemane, hours before his death. In that moment of anguish and anxiety, he asks his closest friends, Peter, John, and James, to accompany him to stay awake and be by his side that night. The Lord begged heaven for an intervention to rescue him from the cross, but accepted the will of the Father. Amid his clamor, he sought out the disciples, who were sleeping, and said to them, "Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." A second time he prayed again, and a second time found them asleep. He went to pray one more time, and when he returned to where the disciples were, it did not matter if they were awake or not. "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come, and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." This symbolic and sarcasm-filled account seems like a parody of the history of Christianity. Time after time, the disciples have failed to stay awake with the Master in his hour of most significant anguish. The flesh is weak and cannot bear the weight of the night. But sooner or later, there comes a time when denial becomes a habit, in which it does not matter if we sleep or stay awake. The Son of Man has been betrayed and handed over once more. There are no easy solutions to remove Christianity from its discredited past. Changing the world with faith in the risen Christ seems like an absurd utopian solution in a post-Christian era. And yet, as Antonio Gonzalez says, the attempts to take Jesus' path seriously may be the most important way in which we, as Christians, can contribute to change in our world today. But the final question I want to ask you as we end this series is, can we stay awake all night with the Master?